Hey there everyone, just before we start today's video I just want to give a massive shout out to the 77 Years team. Towards the end of 2023, the 77 Years team released the History Between Us fanzine. It's a collection of stories about all of the main 13 incarnations of the Doctors and their encounters and relationship with the Master. And it's all told through this fantastic framing device of 13 and O being forced into couples therapy. Each story is brilliant, it's got some fantastic characterisation from these two, and a lot of it is very, very gay, as you can expect. Added to that, there's some amazing artwork from some super talented artists, and they are just begging to become your new desktop wallpapers. Unfortunately, the physical releases sold out long before we even got to see Ncuti Gatwa as the Doctor, but it is still available for digital release with the artwork included. On top of that, in June of this year, the team actually released an audiobook version featuring voice acting and impressions from a bunch of Doctor Who fans like me. I play characters across 4 of these 13 stories, including Professor Stodos, who teaches the young Theta Sigma and Kosh Teok down at the Academy on Gallifrey, and not only 1, but 2 incarnations of the Master himself, as originally played by the legendary Roger Delgado and my own personal favourite, Anthony Ainley. Sadly, anyone who follows this channel will be saddened to learn that there's no Alex McQueen in these stories. I'm afraid I couldn't do much on that one. I had a wheelhouse, I tried to get them to do it, but they just wanted incarnations of the Master that people had heard of. But despite that, you're still getting a lot for your money. You're getting over a dozen stories for less than a tenner, and all of the profits will be going to Micro Rainbow, a charity dedicated to providing safe housing to LGBTQ+ refugees in the UK. This was a wonderful project to be a part of, even slightly, which just shows the best and most passionate side of the Doctor Who fandom, and I honestly cannot recommend it enough to any fan of the show. Thank you again to Kat Wheeler and the rest of the team for letting me be a part of this. The links are in the description below. Now, without further ado, welcome to part 2 of the Chibnall Whittaker Positivity Rewatch. Hope you enjoy. With Chris Chibnall's first series as Doctor Who showrunner, the goal was to do a soft reboot with an emphasis on getting new audience members in, akin to Russell T Davies's Rose in 2005. Gone were the returning elements from previous series, as well as the fan service references that were prevalent after the show's 50th anniversary, and here came an emphasis on new characters, new monsters, and new storylines. The only returning elements were the Doctor herself, the TARDIS, and a single Dalek. The words Time Lord weren't even mentioned in Series 11. With Series 12, Chibnall's goals had changed. We've eased people in with a fairly simple Doctor Who affair. Now let's get deeper into the show's history and show them just how much bigger on the inside the programme really is. If Series 11 was for the newbies, and Series 12 was for the fans. We still have our regular adventures with the fan, of course, but now we're getting into returning villains, our companions learning about the Doctor's past, and shocking revelations that will date back to the show's early years, that will shake the foundation of the series itself. Doctor Who Series 12 didn't ask for people's interest, it demanded your attention right from the start. Join me on the second part of this journey as I revisit the second series of Jodie Whittaker's time as the 13th Doctor and highlight some of the best moments that this era of the show had to offer. And we can all look back and maybe get a new perspective on this timeless adventure. You know, the more baddies that 13 faces, the less she minces words. The second she is done introducing herself to Daniel Barton, she is already on him like a lioness on an antelope. Just straight out of the gate with all the incriminating questions. And she does it with a smile on her face the whole time. The Doctor is many things, and chief among them is a professional nuisance. Who else starts a conversation with,
"So, did you assassinate the head of MI6 yourself, or just order it?"
The lead up to this moment is great as well. The fan rocking up to Barton's party in full MI6 regalia with Sega Nakanola's James Bond inspired remix of Me and My Mates. The scenes of the guys blending in at the casino is also quite fun. Special mention to when she's at the blackjack table.
Card. Snap! Is that not the game?
Makes me burst out laughing every time. I've been watching Doctor Who for a long time. Most of my life, technically. And let me tell you something. There are a few feelings that this show has invoked in me from watching it in my childhood that have remained with me through to adulthood. And most prominently of those feelings is getting to the end of an episode and being filled with dread as both the Doctor and I realise, oh.
Hi.
You can't be.
Oh, I can be. I very much am.
I think there are three things that make the Master's big reveal here so special. Firstly is how unexpected it was. This is probably the first time in the revival where the Master coming back was a surprise that wasn't built up. Most people kind of expected him to come back in Series 3, after all you had the Daleks in Series 1, Cybermen in Series 2. The only real surprise that he turned up as Derek Jacobi one episode earlier than expected. Missy was built up throughout whole of Series 8, so her turning out to be the Master was always on the cards. Again, the only big surprise was the gender change. And John Sims' big comeback in Series 10 was spoiled before the pilot even aired. Here though, there was absolutely no indication from the marketing that the Master would be back at all, let alone in the opener. It's one of those times where Chibnall's secretiveness on spoilers ends up really paying off. Yes, we don't know much about it going in, but that just makes the big reveal even more shocking. But this leads me on to the second great thing. There were clues in the episode. Obviously you've got O dropping the Spy Master comment, but you've also got references about him knowing the Doctor back when she was a man, and compiling files about her, which, as a side note, makes Graham consider how much he actually knows about the Doctor, which nicely sets up the arc with the fan learning more about her and just realising who it is they've been travelling with this whole time. And then you've got the technologically advanced setup in the hut, and the way he seems to enjoy using it to torture the captured Kasavi. There's even a moment where he says that Barton can't be an alien since there's evidence of him having a whole life, to which Yaz says that it isn't impossible. I mean, Harold Saxon, anybody? They're just subtle enough hints to niggle at the back of your mind, but not enough for you to suspect O of anything malicious. It's bringing me nicely on to the third thing. Sacha Dhawan. As O, he made a genuinely great impression. He was sweet, awkward, a bit of a sad geek, but he's earnest. I was kind of hoping that he'd maybe get to be a full member of the fam by the end. Then, as soon as the Doctor finds a tiny discrepancy in his backstory, he doesn't even bother to try and cover it up. It's like a light switch. He's just been waiting to get the drop on her for so long, he might as well just do it now. And this definitely comes across in his debut performance as the Master. He's like an excited little kid, bouncing up and down and giggling his head off. There's also a really fun improvised little moment where he tries to put the matchbox containing the real O shrunken corpse back into his jacket pocket. Side note, great to see the TCE back, by the way. But then Sacha just chucks the box away. It's a great first impression, and oh boy, will he continue to make a mark. But we'll get to that. The characterisation of the 13th Doctor as a more bubbly and positive figure makes sense given her predecessor's, shall we say, Scottish disposition. But one thing I found lacking in Series 11 was an edge to the character. Obviously she'd take umbrage with the villain of the week, as the Doctor does, but it never felt personal to her. She felt largely unaffected by the stuff that happened in her stories. And this makes sense, considering that Series 11 was really about Ryan and Graham building their relationship after the death of Grace. But with Series 12, it was time to start unpeeling the Doctor's mysterious layers again, after not even mentioning the name of her species in the last series. And this is why you put her up against somebody like the Master, someone who knows her intimately, more than anybody else, and can really rile this otherwise unassuming Doctor. Namely, by destroying Gallifrey while her back is turned, making her feel guilty about not being there to save them, and most prominently, not telling her why. Yeah, that'll do it. The look of devastation on Jodie Whittaker's face as she opens that TARDIS door to see her worst nightmare come true again is burned into the back of my skull, as is the scowl that she gives after receiving the Master's confession. This is the kind of thing that I expected to see from Jodie after hearing that she worked with Chibnall on Broadchurch. I've still not seen it, but knowing that she plays the mother of the murder victim in that show, and then seeing her get cast as the Doctor, I had been waiting to see her display some of those serious acting chops. And she doesn't disappoint here. It's a silent performance, but it conveys 1,000 words. Most of them probably very angry and very explicit right now. There's obviously some contention over Gallifrey being destroyed again after the Day of the Doctor made such a big point of bringing it back, and then we sadly didn't get to see much of it since. Essentially, it made the whole thing feel a bit redundant. But honestly, I'm not that upset by it. Partially because, as I say, we didn't really get much of a follow-up to it in the 12th Doctor's era. But this also provides an interesting piece of characterisation for this new dynamic between the Doctor and the Master. The Master's return has been a bit of a sore topic for some fans, given how we last saw them at the end of Series 10, with some obviously not very happy that Missy's character development has been undone. While I liked Missy's redemption arc and thought it was much better handled than I could have ever imagined at the time, in my heart of hearts, I knew that it was never going to stick. Let's face it, there was no way that was going to be the final end for the Master. They're the Doctor's most frequent foe in the series, and there are two things that they never do: stay dead, or stay good for very long. I would, however, be a total liar if I said I wasn't expecting Spyfall to acknowledge the fact that the Master was a goodie the last time we saw her, even if the Doctor was unaware of that fact. And now they're back to shrinking people and helping aliens invade Earth. It's a very jarring change, to say the least. And while it doesn't make explicit reference to Missy's reformation and their eventual relapse into villainy, there is one moment in Part 2 that totally justifies the Master's characterisation for me. So you've got the scene in the gallery where he bursts in and he starts shouting and killing people. It's all very intimidating and edgy and over the top. But then there's this one line that he says to the Doctor, where this version of the Master just immediately clicks into place for me.
When I kill them, Doctor, it gives me a little buzz. Right here, in the hearts. It's like, how would I describe it? It's like knowing I'm in the right place, doing what I was made for.
What I was made for. This is the Master's normal, his nature. They tried their best to be good, but it was never going to truly work out. With this regeneration, not only has he reset to his default, but I think he resents his previous life. Trying to be good just brought him pain. He just can hack it. That's why he's so over the top and shouty and cackly. He's overcompensating, making up for lost time, trying to find purpose again. And that purpose is causing mayhem and misery to everyone around him. That's why he's so insistent on the Doctor kneeling before him and calling him by his name. My goodness, he nearly burst into tears of joy right there. He's right back where he wants to be. And that is so very, very sad. Missy is dead. Long live the Master. So, I'm breaking from my regular format a little bit for this episode specifically, simply to give out what is simultaneously my hottest and most neutral take. Orphan 55 is fine. In fact, I'd go as far to say that it's actually pretty good. I mean, it's certainly the most over-hated episode of the show. And look, I'm not going to sit here and spend 5 hours debating on how
Orphan 55 is actually the best episode of Doctor Who, and here's why.
No. There are obviously problems with it. There are far too many characters for its own good. The ending monologue is preachy. Well, about as preachy as Doctor Who tends to be. The twist of it being Earth all along is far from original. The subplot with Bella and Kane being related goes absolutely nowhere, and poor Julia Foster's performance as Vilma has been mocked so much by the fandom that it's become a meme. But by all the saints, the reaction this episode gets from the wider fandom, it's astonishing to me. Like, I'm genuinely shocked that this episode gets as much hate as it does. I personally find it to be a really fun story, with some really cool monsters, which I'll get into soon. It's also got some really funny moments, some really dark moments, a romance subplot for Ryan, which I thought was quite nice, and a subject matter which, while not being handled perfectly, I grant you, is an especially relevant talking point nowadays, especially with the political hellscape of the late 2010s and early 2020s. In my eyes, it's quintessential Doctor Who, and I would genuinely rather watch this over some of the fan favourites. Even Ed Heim's script from the previous series. Anyway, now that I've officially marked myself for cancellation... Oh, who am I kidding? I'm talking about the Chibnall era positively on the internet. Of course I'm going to get cancelled. Back to our regularly scheduled programming. Jodie was absolutely on fire in this episode. Admittedly, I'm in a bit two minds on her angrier characterisation in this, but I chalk that up to her recent discovery of Gallifrey being destroyed, which has understandably put her in, as Yaz puts it, a bit of a mardy mood. That, and given we're dealing with another dead world that she very much cares for, I'd say her outrage is totally justified. And yet, despite that, she doesn't let that affect her way of planning a solution to the problem. In particular, I'm a big fan of her plan to get her and Bella to escape from the Dreg leader in the control room. It just feels so doctorly to me. She's able to negotiate with what is essentially a rabid animal, in a situation where, if it goes wrong, all parties involved will die. But she knows that she will get it resolved peacefully, because there isn't an alternative. If the Dreg kills them, then it loses its CO2 supply, and it dies. And it understands this. However, it also understands that if it complies, it's more than capable of hunting them down after they escape. And the Doctor knows this as well. She won't kill it, but she'll certainly buy time to save herself and her friends. And that's all she needs. I just think it's a neat bit of the Doctor using her knowledge and impeccable logic to get over an obstacle. One thing I really liked in this episode was the Dregs. While I don't think their design is anything special, the concept of them does strike this sort of existential fear into me, the same way that something like the Cybermen do. This feeling of the monsters being us, but also not quite us at the same time. Seeing what they're capable of drives that fear further home, because it's what we, as a species, are capable of doing if we're not careful. The initial Dreg attack on Tranquility Spa is one of the most tense sequences in the show for me, and a big part of that is that we don't see them. The Dregs are mostly obscured throughout, with only snippets of their unfeeling eyes, and their terrible jaws, and their terrible claws, and their knobbly knees, and their turned out... Hold on, no, sorry, I'm thinking of something else. The residents of the spa really sell this desperation here with their reactions. They attempt to escape down narrow corridors where you can't see what's around the bend, only to be met with one of these hulking monstrosities and torn to pieces. I especially love how Ryan and Bella take shelter in the steam room, and they admit to each other how they were lying about their initial meet-cute. Okay, it's not a major revelation for them in the grand scheme of things, but this sudden show of honesty does highlight how both Ryan and Bella genuinely thought that they were going to die right there, with a Dreg hovering over them, were it not for the Doctor's intervention. The ionic membrane pushing out from the wall behind them is a great image as well. Graham even believes that for a brief moment Ryan has been killed. It nearly gives him a heart attack. It's dark stuff, and it would have terrified me as a kid, the same way that the lone Dalek gunning down Van Statten's men did, or just the empty child itself. I would have gotten some Who-induced nightmares if this came out about 15 years earlier. One of the fun things about meeting historical figures in Doctor Who is when they are a personal hero to one of the members of the TARDIS crew. I always find it the most fun when it's one of the Doctor's inspirational figures, quite often because they end up being kindred spirits. Both the Doctor and Nikola Tesla are genius inventors who are a bit eccentric and are slightly shunned by their respective societies, but ultimately speak for the progress of those societies. Of course they were going to get on like a house on fire. The Doctor and Tesla's friendship is so lovely in this. I'll get into it more shortly as that bleeds into the best episode moment, but it also gives way to the best 13th Doctor moment in this episode. The Doctor's pep talk to Tesla outside the TARDIS. For as much as this Doctor's famous for her social awkwardness and not quite knowing what to say to someone, it's lovely to see her in a situation where she actually does know what to say. And how does she do it? The best way the Doctor does to cheer someone up. She makes him laugh. She just wanders out to him and immediately diffuses the tension with a joke about how Edison is jealous that the aliens aren't after him. It's not a huge laugh out loud joke for the audience, but it's not for us. It's for Tesla. And it's enough to make him smile. Once she's got him out of his funk, she assures him that she's not going to let him get taken. Because he's got so much more life left to live, and he's going to do fantastic things with it. That's the Doctor. She will drag you by the hair to your destiny of becoming an amazing human being, whether you like it or not. I think it's fair to say that the biggest strength of the Chibnall era has been its historical episodes. Comparisons have been made to the Hartnell era, of trying to teach kids about real history, and I'd say they're pretty on point. You know, minus the mud aliens, the space racists, and the giant sexy scorpions. What's made these work so well, I think, is the way the setting has been established, to the point of it feeling real. From segregated Alabama, to India tearing itself apart in the fallout of a disaster, to the petty infighting of a small English village resulting in the deaths of innocents. Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror is different in that it's character-focused. Goran Vishnik's portrayal of Tesla is so sincere, and he's practically carrying the episode by himself. But luckily, he's not by himself. His relationship with the Doctor, as I mentioned before, is the best thing to come out of this episode. I compared the two characters earlier, and it's the initial realisation on Tesla's part that's a highlight for me. He sees the sonic screwdriver and his jaw just hits the ground when the Doctor casually mentions she made it herself out of spoons. It's at this moment where he not only realises that he's talking to another genius, but he's also just made a new best friend. One of the most endearing things about Nikola Tesla as a historical figure is how passionate he was about his work, and Vishnik definitely gets that across in his performance. As he shares his love of inventing with the Doctor and how it keeps him going despite the hardships in life that he's facing, and the ones he'll eventually face as he gets older. It's easily the best historical guest appearance in Doctor Who since Vincent van Gogh, which, much like the real deal, I hope will be celebrated for years to come. So, with this story, we're about halfway through the Chibnall era, and that seems kind of fitting. See, this is the story where, around about now, the show gets turned upside down, and I'd like to take a minute, just sit right there, and I'll tell you the highlights from the Judoon invasion of Gloucestershire. So there's been a pretty consistent theme here with the 13th Doctor moment so far. Jodie is very funny, and she's also very good at confronting villains. So doing those two things together would make sense. The initial confrontation with the Judoon seems pretty standard for the Doctor at first. How dare you attack these innocent people, you should be ashamed of yourselves, etc, etc. But the further she gets into the conversation, it's clear she's going to have to try harder and harder to come up with a good reason for them not to blow the humans away, thanks to the Judoon being a lot dumber than your average cop. And with a little help from seasoned detectives officers Khan and Sinclair, she manages to black her way through the confrontation on utter nonsense like local Earth Law 12, and just about managing to barter a 5-minute time limit to negotiate. Her complaining that they're already counting down when they haven't even started yet always gets a laugh out of me. And of course, the traditional Judoon platoon running gag, which isn't going away anytime soon. The Judoon are just one of those Doctor Who aliens that are just ripe for comedy, and Jodie, as well as Mandip and Tosin, do great work with them. This should come as a shock to no one. So, we've learned that Ruth is the fugitive that the Judoon are after, but she has no idea why. We see that the Doctor is suspicious and trying to figure out just what's up with her and her hidden personality that's starting to bubble to the surface. The closer they get to the lighthouse, Ruth starts listing off facts and figures about her backstory. She seems to be becoming more and more tense, as if possessed by something. Just what the hell's going on? The Doctor searches around the area and notices a conspicuous looking gravestone with no markings on it and a shovel next to it. Meanwhile, Ruth is suddenly drawn to the glass fire alarm, distressed to the point where there are tears in her eyes, and this is starting to look a little familiar, like with one of the most intense scenes of the show, the ending of Utopia, with Professor Yana and the Fob Watch. What the hell's going on? Ruth's memories are restored, and she grabs a gun. Meanwhile, the Doctor uncovers a police telephone box in the grave. Just what the hell's going on? And then Ruth appears behind her, and announces to both her and the audience that iconic opening.
Hello, I'm the Doctor.
What the hell is going on? Regardless of how you feel about the concept of pre-Hartnell Doctors, you have to admit, this was an amazing and absolutely insane scene to witness. It's certainly one way to keep the audience on their toes, to say the least. But I've got to say though, the MVP of this scene is definitely Sega Nakanola. The Lighthouse is one of the best tracks that he's composed for the show, and it's what truly makes this scene as tense as it is. I thought his music for the series was pretty good before, but he really came into his own for Series 12. But of course, we cannot forget Jo Martin, who instantly wows as this mysterious new incarnation of the Doctor, to almost unanimous praise for her performance in her debut. So, I think it's only fair to add a new category just for this particular incarnation. So, having talked about the lighthouse scene, where the heck do I go from here? Well, luckily, Jo gets to carry the episode's finale. While Jodie Whittaker does her best to butt in, it's Jo Martin that gets the final say. Since her introductory scene, she's seen carrying around this rifle, which immediately puts a large question mark around this Doctor, given that even the War Doctor was known to go in unarmed. Her gun is, of course, immediately confiscated upon capture, and thusly pointed at her face by Gat for the entirety of the third act. All the time though, she tells her not to shoot her, but the way she delivers this line sounds very much like a warning as opposed to a plea for mercy. Of course, Gat, being a Doctor Who baddie, doesn't listen and she pulls the trigger anyway, only for the gun to backfire on her. And as per the fugitive Doctor's plan, they just entered international waters, so anything goes from a legal perspective. The Doctor tells the Judoon to back off, unless they want more of what Gat got. But her response to Jodie's objection to the use of weapons speaks volumes on what this Doctor is like. While she did a lot of shady work for the division, which probably involved a lot of doing harm to people, she's not a woman of violence. The Doctor never has been. She will attack in self-defense in a way that would make Pertwee blush, and outsmart her enemies into literally shooting themselves. But she won't actively use violence to solve her problems. She's still letting her massive brain do the fighting. The kung fu fighting and the weapons proficiency, they're just secondary weapons in her arsenal. An arsenal that, presumably after the events of this story, she's looking to put to rest for a little while. Certainly until the division catches up with her. However long that lasts. This This is less a specific moment of Jodie's performance and more how the Doctor's utilised in this episode. One of the big selling points in the episode is how the fam are located at different points on the globe investigating the same case under orders from the Doctor. It feels a little bit like the Seventh Doctor is most manipulative. Something this series has been doing a lot is emphasising that the flat team structure really isn't as flat as her friends like to believe. From their realisation in the first story that they don't actually know anything about her, culminating in the speech in a couple of episodes' time about how far above them in the stratosphere she is. And the gang had been fooling themselves this entire time. While this is one of the best episodes to utilise these characters individually and as a team, there's still a feeling that this lot would be totally lost without a Doctor. I mean, Graham and Ryan had never even heard the word pathogen before. What's also great about the way that the Doctor is utilised in this mission is how easily she can communicate with her team by just showing up in the TARDIS as soon as there's more to report. It's a great use of the anywhere and anywhen premise that the TARDIS provides as a plot device. I particularly love how she's in the background quietly examining the aliens and equipment in the warehouse while the rest of the cast are just bickering and they jump out of their skins as soon as she starts thinking out loud. It all has the feeling that the Doctor is always 2 steps ahead at all times, and Jodie plays it really well as the true leader of her little squad, while also keeping the playfulness of the Doctor present throughout. While Praxis' main focus is on the plastic pollution and the pathogens, it finds its heart in the strained romance between Jake and Adam, the highlight of which has to be Jake's heart-to-heart with Graham on the beach. Jake is very much a typical macho man, whose biggest fear is the same as most blokes: opening up emotionally. He cares immensely, but he's just horrible at showing it, because he doesn't believe that he's deserving of the love that he gets, which leads to those he loves most to believe that he truly doesn't care. It's an endless toxic cycle that he just can't get himself out of. Not helped by the fact that his husband's a freaking astronaut, and he's just a not very good cop. Graham, the older and wiser figure that he is, who spent his whole TARDIS tenure trying to get over his relationship ending, is the perfect person to pair Jake up with here, because he only needs to say one thing to him. I don't think Adam is the one that you're punishing. Because he knows what it's like to be with someone who's just that amazing, and he's spent a long time trying not to beat himself up over it. It's just a really lovely scene, which just showcases how much healing that Graham has done in the TARDIS, and he's imparting that knowledge he's gained onto somebody who really needs it right now. 13 famously keeps her feelings very close to her chest, so it makes sense that in the mental health focused episode that this is where we get to see that insecurity leak to the surface again. Her biggest weakness at this stage is just being on her own, but she can't even muster up the courage to say so. Even when asked directly if she's going to be alright while her fam just pop out for the evening, she almost immediately jumps at the console to skip over to the next meeting because she just can't focus herself on anything else. Even when she answers that distress call, she's still chatting away at her mates as if they're still with her. While not necessarily as dark or emotionally charged as the other revelations that the fan members have explored throughout this episode, this does show the Doctor's codependency issues starting to become a bit unhealthy. And her refusal to open up on basically everything on top of that just makes her an interesting antithesis to how the rest of Team TARDIS come to terms with their own demons in this story. It brings her down to earth. We often see the Doctor as this godly figure with eternity on her shoulders, but as she discovers in her encounter with Zelen, she is fallible, and does share weaknesses with her ephemeral companions. Man, the 2020s have been a wreck of a decade so far. The ending of this episode has been living rent-free in my mind since airing, given the amount of mental stress that we've all been through with the pandemic, and personally, I've had a lot of things going on these last few years myself. It's partially why this video has taken so long to come out after the last one. One particular scene I liked at the time of airing, but didn't quite resonate with the same way as other people did, was Yaz's scene, at the side of the road, having run away from home after a breaking point with school bullies and exams and not being able to talk to anyone about it. With her intentions being pretty heavily implied to be, well, let's just say they're quite bleak. While I've not been in this position of Yaz's, it's certainly hit me like a truck all this time later. It's that feeling of being trapped that hurts the most. No matter what you do, whether it's staying in a bad situation where it feels like everyone around you is making it worse, or trying to distance yourself from those things and suddenly realising that you're now alone with no one to help. It sucks. It really freaking sucks. But as cliched as it might be, as the police officer who finds Yaz says, these moments where you're at your lowest are just moments. These times where things are at their worst for now are just for now, and in time it will have passed, and the people who are around you now will be just as happy to be around you as you are to be around them. The moment where Yaz visits the officer at her home means just as much to her as it does to Yaz, because she made it through to the other side. And we will too. All of us. I promise. Sometimes the most intense Doctor Who moments are the ones where the Doctor themselves is losing the cool. They're always just so funny and confident in the face of danger, more often than not because they've got an ace up their sleeve, or at least on standby with a baseball bat. So when you see them in a situation where they're scared, the audience is suddenly aware that things are not going to be easy. The Doctor is suddenly confronted with a lone Cyberman at a time where she's become quite dependent on her new family, and following the events of her previous regeneration, which involved the Cybermen as well, which was a rough week, to say the least. While she spends the whole time being flippant and making fun of him, mostly getting a kick out of it because she can actually get a reaction from him, make no mistakes, she is very scared right now. In the moments before and after the confrontation where she speaks to her friends, she is at her most authoritative. She orders them, not advises or warns them, orders them to stay put and do not follow her. It's clear that her last two televised encounters with the Cybermen are still playing on her mind, and is still very much guilty about the conversions of Danny Pink and Bill Potts. She is absolutely not losing another friend in her fight with the Cybermen today, and she doesn't care how much she needs to shout at them to keep them safe. To talk about the confrontation itself briefly as well, it's fantastic. You can really see some Troughton-esque moments from Jodie here, just running up to this angry metal man, smashing up the room and then telling him off for his temper. I'm fairly sure that she forgot she had a job to do here and was just enjoying winding him up. I especially love her quick getaway at the end. Pat would have been proud. The lone Cyberman Ashad has been one of the greatest things done with the Cybermen in the last few years. Heck, maybe even since the late 60s. Their greatest asset as a monster is that conversion aspect. So why not have a bit of fun with a half-finished one? Ashad is a really interesting character in this story, and a very fitting villain for the story about Frankenstein author Mary Shelley. So much so that this is the second time that Doctor Who has done this in the last decade. A man brought back to life by spare parts of humans and technology, with an insatiable anger brought about by his identity crisis. Shelley, being the empathetic soul that she is the only one in the room to ask his name and about his pain. She sees the broken soul of a man underneath who spared her child, and then would go on to inspire her creation. However, it turns out that Ashad is not like the creature in her story. the man underneath is a monster. He reveals that not only did he spare her son because he was too sick to be converted, alluding to William Shelley's poor health resulting in his death only 3 years later, but also that he volunteered for conversion. Ashad was a Cyberman fanatic in his human life, signed up willingly for conversion, murdered his own family, and is now hell-bent on finishing the job that the Cybermen started. The second he turns on Shelley is terrifying, and he immediately cements himself as a villain to be remembered for years to come. Can't wait for Patrick O'Kane to get a Big Finish box set someday. If the haunting of Villa Diodati had the Doctor reveal to her fam that the flat team structure isn't at all flat, then this episode capitalises on her role as leader. Much like Praxius before, the Doctor is very much in charge of the operation they've put in place at the start of this episode. She's kitted out her little soldiers with gadgets and weapons and large amounts of technobabble to hold off the Cybermen. She is not playing around today. She has no time for flippant remarks. She is a time lady on a mission. So, when it all goes to pot, she isn't very happy, to say the least. Right now, she is standing among the bodies of the people that she failed to save, with 3 more breathing, expendable, convertible bodies relying on her to save them. And she's got nothing. She walked into this fight with the best weapon she had, and they were gone in a blink of an eye. There's no way that she can keep her friends safe anymore. And she needs to emphasise that to this group of hapless humans who volunteered for this assignment that they need to get out and save themselves. Of course, it's never nice to see the Doctor shout at their companions, especially when they're trying to help. But given how many of her friends she's lost to the Cybermen recently, sometimes you need to be cruel to be kind. After all, better to hurt her friends' feelings while they still have them. Speaking of the opening, yeah, this episode peaks early. The opening firefight is amazing. The Cyberdrones being literal floating cyberheads is a little bit silly, but it's grown on me. I especially love the fact that there's no music going on here. It emphasises the seriousness of the scene, more than if there was some big epic score in the background. It's like watching footage from an actual war zone. There's also a nice bit of irony in that the ones who were killed first in the initial assault are killed because they panicked. Their fear took over them, and that's how the Cybermen got them. Ashad also had a fantastic presence here. I particularly love the bit in the church where the human half of his face is obscured by shadow, and you can only clearly see the Cyberman half. He's speaking here as an emissary of the Cybermen, to help cleanse the sins of the unconverted, like they're some sort of cult. It makes for just as creepy a performance as last time, with his understanding of the human weakness known as emotion, specifically fear. It makes him just such a deadly force to be reckoned with. Additional shout out to the cold opening and his monologue about clutching victories from the jaws of failure, as we zoom in on the eye of that cyberhead into the opening titles. Absolutely masterful transition. Well, here we are. The big one. Since the late 80s, starting with the Carbon Master Plan, there's been a sort of recurring theme of mythologising the Doctor, making him a major player in the history of the show and its wider universe. In the 3 decades since, they seem to accrue a brand new title every other year. Time's Champion, The Other, The Oncoming Storm, The Last of the Time Lords, Time Lord Victorious, The Madman with a Box and a Screwdriver, The Good Man, The Predator of the Daleks, The Beast of Trenzalore, The Hybrid that will stand in the ruins of Gallifrey, The Shadow of the Valiard. Heck, even the name Doctor has been made into a title that one has to earn. Can be translated as Great Warrior in some cultures, and the word has even been implied to be based upon the Doctor themselves. After a while, This does add up to being a bit much when the Doctor initially started as someone who just ran away from home because he didn't want to waste his life away in one place in one time wearing silly robes and reading books. I bring this up since The Timeless Child seems like another one to add to the pile of grand titles. The Doctor is now basically the progenitor of the entirety of Time Lord society, and that sounds like the sort of thing that would be lauded over many villains to come after this. After all, the entire crux of the Master's characterisation in this series has been his inferiority complex after hearing this news. But one of the reasons why I'm far kinder to the Timeless Children than a lot of people is the Doctor's reaction to hearing the news.
The child is you. You are the Timeless Child.
No, I'm not.
For the Doctor, this isn't a grand moment of realisation of her great purpose in the universe. It's traumatising. She just learned about a whole other life that she had no idea about. A life where she'd been tortured and experimented on before being made into an agent, policing the whole of time and space, on top of starting the very society that she ran away from all those millennia ago. This is the last thing that she wants to hear. And it brings about a rage I wasn't really expecting from this Doctor, of all Doctors. She screams at the Master, actually assaulting him, desperate for answers or any hint of this being a ruse. But it's not. And it breaks her. This is why I'm generally accepting of this storyline more than most. Yes, I prefer not to muck around with pre-Hartnell Doctors or make the Doctor the founder of Time Lord Society or anything like that, but like it or not, we're here now. And shockingly, I was actually quite fascinated by this as an idea for story potential going forward, and the change that this ignites in the Doctor in the subsequent series. I mean, at time of release, the Doctor coming to terms with their adoption has become part of the 60th anniversary specials and part of the new Russell T Davies era. The impact has stuck. Suddenly, Doctor Who has become a question asked by the title character herself. And it's bringing out a brand new side to this character that Jodie is absolutely sprinting with. With this 3-part finale, this is where her performance kicks up a notch, from pretty good to great. And it only gets better from here. Sacha Dhawan, man. Dude just steals every scene that he's in. Yeah, he does have his over-the-top moments, but when he hits, he shatters every single bone in my fragile little body. And in typical Master fashion, they're always at their best when they're on top before their inevitable fall. As if revealing the Doctor's hidden past to herself wasn't bad enough, he's also been working on his plans in the background, hijacking the Cyberman's plans, for the 3rd time in a row, and taking control in order to create the Cybermasters, converted Time Lords with the capacity to regenerate and self-repair. I see these guys get a bad rep, and I honestly don't know why. I think these designs are fantastic, and it's a refreshing idea for the Cybermen. We've done self-repair before, but this is a biological advantage from the original creature. A perfect mix of evolution and machinery. Admittedly, yes, they don't do anything in this story after their initial demonstration, but I'm forgiving of that because the very existence of these things is high enough stakes for me. If these guys get out, then the universe just doesn't stand a chance. Sacha's performance in this scene is wonderful, and you can see just how much fun he's having. It's actually a really sincere happiness, and that's what makes it terrifying. The moment the Cybermaster gets up after regenerating, he goes from the verge of tears to maniacal laughter to a cathartic, victorious scream. I cannot imagine any previous Master actor to pull off a moment like that without it just devolving into your bog standard maniacal laugh before the obligatory "Behold my evil master plan, Doctor!" I almost feel happy for the guy before going back to being utterly terrified of him. Oh hey, look who's back. This is definitely my favourite Fugitive Doctor scene. It's short and simple, but those are my favourites. I have to congratulate Chibnall here. He obviously knew he was going to ruffle a few feathers with this timeless child idea. I mean, come on, why wouldn't he? So it makes sense to include a scene like this where the Doctor talks to somebody who she admires and trusts, i.e. herself, to tell her, look, I know this is a lot and it's a big scary change, but that doesn't make everything that you've been through before less important. It's not exactly a subtle nod to the audience, but I appreciate it. But the actual line...
Have you ever been limited by who you were before?
It's just one of those wonderfully doctorly nuggets of wisdom. For as much as I love a big bombastic 10-minute Moffat pen speech, sometimes all it takes is a profound one-liner. Hey, they certainly seem to work for 13.
Now that does sound like me talking.
I also love the way that Jo Martin carries herself in this scene. It's a lot warmer than the rest of her scenes with Jodie. Those scenes tend to get bogged down in a lot of bickering, as most multi-Doctor stories do, but this scene focuses on what makes a good Doctor. She helps people get better. Even if that person is herself.
Have a blast of this, Matrix.
Man, Jodie's just tugging on my heartstrings for this whole thing. We've talked before about how cagey with her emotions the 13th Doctor can be. When confronted with a problem, instead of confronting it, she internalises it. This episode presents a different approach to that internalisation. After the events of the Timeless Children, she wants to talk about it with someone. She needs to talk about it with someone. But she's isolated from everyone. She tries to keep a brave face, but she's very noticeably miserable. This is only made worse when she finds out that she's missed 10 months of her fam's lives. Just thank God that COVID wasn't canon to the Whoniverse during 2020. As she puts it, it's been a rough few decades. For me, the best part of this arc is when she sits down with Ryan to catch up. I think it's a nice little bookend to his time on the TARDIS, as he's set to leave from the end of the story. Something I've noticed on this rewatch is that the Doctor seems to have had the closest bond with Ryan while the full fam was still on board. She's like his big sister, this sagely font of knowledge and experience for him to learn from, but also somebody that he can goof off with like the actual pair of children that they were. Added to that, Ryan has had the largest amount of growth since starting his travels. So, if she was going to open up to anyone, it makes sense that it would be Ryan. I particularly love that when Ryan does ask the Doctor what happened with the Master, he calls her out for deflecting the question, so she has no choice but to answer him. Jodie gives such a fragile performance here. She's trying to reach out, but at the same time not make it all about herself, which... mood. But you can see just how much she appreciates the conversation with Ryan. It feels like it's come full circle, with Ryan offering the Doctor the same kind of advice about change and how it's utterly terrifying that she would give him. And she couldn't be prouder or happier to have her friends back. Who doesn't love a good Dalek Civil War? There's something about the stories where the Daleks are blasting each other to bits that hits the part of your brain that craves needless destruction just right. I call it the Michael Bay loop. But it also highlights an important part about the Daleks as a Nazi power. At the end of the day, only one group can be on top in the fascist society. And they, by definition, are a very exclusionary group. Some people may agree and carry the ideology with them in order to join the cause, but they don't get the privilege that those with the quote-unquote genetic advantage do. It may screech like a Dalek, and glide like a Dalek, but if that ugly little blob is slightly less blobby than you are, then they're as good as a dead blob. you've got to feel a little bit sorry for the reconnaissance scout Dalek. He gets sent off to a primitive mud ball, gets beaten by the primitive natives with their primitive weapons, gets split into pieces before suddenly being resurrected centuries later, goes on a mission to rebuild its casings in somebody's shed, runs into the bloody Doctor of all people, gets microwaved and thrown into a supernova, gets cloned a year later, goes through all this effort to build a secret cloning facility and hijack Robertson's drone project to finally take over the primitive mud ball, third time's the charm, almost succeeds. And what do his bosses have to say?
Exterminate!
All because he and his clones were all riddled with Leo's fingerprints. He gave everything to his cause. Thrice. And after all that, he gets lynched by the very people he did it for. Rest in peace, Recon Scout Kevin. In hindsight, you probably should have known better. Additional shout out to a very close second for this category with the Doctor's final confrontation with the Daleks in the skies. By far some of the most impressive visuals I have ever seen in anything. The shot of the Daleks rushing the TARDIS was the second New Year's Day in a row where Chris Chibnall made me exclaim, "Holy shit!" at my TV screen. That ain't nothing, I tell you. Series 12 might have two of the most controversial episodes in the show's history in it, but I'd be lying if I said it was boring. From the reveal of the Master on New Year's Day 2020 to the breakup of the fam on New Year's Day 2021, each week threw a really interesting idea at me. I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. I hadn't felt this invested in where the series was going since about 2011 with the Silent Story arc. Granted, I think Series 12 and Series 6 suffer similar problems with how it executes the story arc, but I think the fact the series had people gripped to know what was going to happen next is outstanding. Everything felt so much more epic in this series. Not only did the new formula from Series 11 feel more polished and improved, but there was a much larger scope for the stories and for our cast to do, especially Yaz, who, while I've not mentioned her much in this video, she's really grown as a companion, and I think that's probably after Chibnall was made aware of the feedback fans had about her not having much to do in Series 11. The series really felt like it was Chibnall starting to make his mark on the Whoniverse. While the last series gently opened the door for viewers to see what was inside, Series 12 shoved you right through it into the madness of it all. You can say what you like about Series 12, but these are adventures that I don't think anybody will forget anytime soon.